A wealthy white man marries a black woman, and all the wealthy white women in the city are angry that he married a black girl instead of one of them. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Hotel glittered under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, casting a warm golden glow over the gathering of the city's elite. Jonathan Blake, the towering figure at the center of attention, moved with the ease of a man accustomed to command. But tonight, something was different. As he walked through the crowd hand in hand with his new wife, Amara, the usual admiration that followed him was tinged with something colder, something unspoken but palpable. Jonathan felt the shift in the room as soon as they entered. Eyes flicked toward Amara, curiosity quickly turning to judgment. Whispers started, low and insidious, weaving through the crowd like poison. "Jonathan!" Vanessa Reed's voice cut through the murmurs as she approached, a practiced smile on her lips. Her eyes, however, told a different story, sharp, assessing, and far from friendly. She extended her hand to him, then shifted her gaze to Amara, the smile faltering just a fraction. "Vanessa," Jonathan greeted her warmly, taking her hand briefly. "I'd like you to meet my wife, Amara." Vanessa's eyes swept over Amara, taking in her elegant black dress, her confident posture. But beneath that surface assessment, there was something else, a flicker of disdain that she quickly masked. "How lovely to meet you, Amara," Vanessa said, her tone syrupy sweet. "I must admit, Jonathan, I was quite surprised when I heard the news. We didn't even know you were seeing someone." Amara smiled politely, feeling the weight of Vanessa's words. "We preferred to keep our relationship private," she replied, her voice steady. "Of course," Vanessa responded, her gaze shifting between them. "It's just, well, such an unexpected choice, Jonathan. But then, you always did like to do things your own way." Jonathan's jaw tightened slightly, but his smile didn't waver. "I've always believed in following my heart," he said, glancing at Amara with a warmth that was unmistakable. Vanessa's smile thinned, her eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. "Well, I suppose that's what matters most," she said, her tone tinged with a hint of condescension. "Though I imagine it will take some time for everyone to adjust." "I'm sure they will," Amara said, meeting Vanessa's gaze directly. There was no hostility in her voice, just a quiet confidence that left Vanessa momentarily speechless. Another couple approached, and Vanessa seized the opportunity to extricate herself from the conversation. "Enjoy the evening," she said, her smile tight as she turned away, already whispering to the newcomers. As soon as Vanessa was out of earshot, Jonathan squeezed Amara's hand. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low, concern threading through the words. Amara nodded, her expression calm. "I expected this," she said simply. "We knew it wouldn't be easy." Jonathan sighed, scanning the room, where more eyes were watching them, some subtly, others less so. "They'll have to get used to it," he said firmly. "I'm not hiding who I am, or who I love." Amara smiled up at him, grateful for his unwavering support. "And neither am I." They moved through the room together, more introductions following. Each time the reactions were the same, a polite greeting to Amara, followed by a glance at Jonathan, as if questioning his judgment. The unspoken tension settled over them like a shroud, but they carried on, refusing to let it pull them down. By the time they reached the far end of the ballroom, Jonathan was acutely aware of the growing distance between them and the rest of the crowd. He could feel the gap widening, as though they were being subtly yet unmistakably pushed to the fringes. "Jonathan," came another voice, this one warmer, friendlier. Marcus Lee, Jonathan's best friend and lawyer, stepped forward, a genuine smile on his face. He shook Jonathan's hand firmly, then turned to Amara with a nod of respect. "Amara, it's good to see you again." "You too, Marcus," Amara replied, feeling a wave of relief at the sight of a friendly face. Marcus looked around the room, his expression darkening slightly. "Quite the reception, isn't it?" he said, keeping his voice low. Jonathan frowned. "It's worse than I expected," he admitted. "But I won't let them dictate our lives." Marcus nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. They'll come around eventually. They'll have to." "I hope so," Amara said softly. "But I'm not naive. I know what's driving this. It's not just about us being different. It's about the fact that I'm not who they wanted me to be." Jonathan's expression hardened. "They'll have to deal with it. I won't let them tear us apart." Marcus patted Jonathan on the shoulder. "Just be careful. Vanessa's been stirring the pot since the moment she found out. She's not going to let this go easily." "I'll deal with Vanessa," Jonathan said, his voice firm. and anyone else who tries to come between us." They stood there for a moment, united against the undercurrents of hostility that swirled around them. The night stretched on, but the tone had been set. They were outsiders now, and it was clear that the city's elite would not accept them without a fight. But as they left the gala, heads held high, Jonathan and Amara knew one thing for certain. Their love was strong enough to weather the storm, and no matter what came next, they would face it together. The warm glow of the dining room in Jonathan and Amara's mansion contrasted sharply with the cold reception they had experienced at the gala. The table was set for 6, each place meticulously arranged with fine china and crystal, the scent of a carefully prepared meal wafting through the air. Despite the elegant setting, the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken thoughts as their closest friends gathered for an intimate dinner. Marcus Lee, Jonathan's best friend and lawyer, sat at the head of the table opposite Jonathan. Next to him was his wife Claire, a soft-spoken woman. Across from them were Michael and Linda, another couple who had been friends with Jonathan for years. They had all been there for him through his rise in the business world, but tonight there was a tension that none of them could quite ignore. As the conversation started, it was clear that everyone was tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. Small talk filled the space, discussions of work, travel plans, and the latest news. But beneath the surface, there was a collective unease, as though everyone was waiting for someone else to break the silence. Finally, it was Marcus who spoke up. "So, how was the gala?" he asked, directing his question to Jonathan, but glancing at Amara with a look of concern. Jonathan took a sip of his wine. "It was about what I expected," he replied, his voice calm. "A lot of polite smiles and even more whispering behind our backs." Claire leaned forward slightly, her brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, Amara," she said softly. "It must have been difficult." Amara smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It wasn't unexpected," she said. "I knew there would be some resistance." Michael, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "Resistance? That's putting it mildly. Vanessa Reed's been talking non-stop about how disappointed she is in you, Jonathan. She's been trying to rally the whole social circle against you two." Jonathan's expression darkened. "Vanessa can say whatever she wants. I'm not interested in her approval." "But it's not just her," Linda interjected, her tone cautious. "You know how people follow her lead. If she keeps this up, it's going to make things really hard for you both, professionally and personally." Amara glanced at Jonathan, reading the tension in his face. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," she said, addressing the table, "but we're prepared to face whatever comes our way. We didn't get married to make anyone else happy." There was a pause as everyone took in her words. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "You're right, of course," he said, "but you need to be aware that this isn't just gossip. I've heard rumblings from some of the board members. People are starting to question your decisions, Jonathan. They're looking for reasons to undermine you." Jonathan frowned, his jaw tightening. "Let them try," he said firmly. "I built this company from the ground up. I'm not about to let a bunch of racists dictate how I live my life." "But it's more than that," Marcus continued, his tone cautious but insistent. "This isn't just about race. It's about power, control. Vanessa and her circle, they see your marriage as a threat to the status quo, and they'll do whatever it takes to protect their interests." Amara nodded, understanding the implications. "We're challenging their worldview just by existing," she said quietly. "But that doesn't mean we'll back down." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I don't mean to be negative, but you have to be careful. People like Vanessa, they're not used to being challenged. And when they are, they can get vicious." Jonathan looked at Amara, his expression softening. "I know," he said, "but we're in this together, and as long as we stand by each other, we can handle whatever they throw at us." Claire, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. "I think what you're doing is brave," she said, her voice gentle. "But don't forget to take care of yourselves, too. This kind of stress can take a toll, even on the strongest relationships." Amara reached across the table and took Jonathan's hand. "We're strong enough," she said, her voice firm, "and we're not going to let anyone come between us." The conversation shifted after that, moving away from the tension of the gala and on to lighter topics. But the weight of the earlier discussion lingered in the air. They all knew that the road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges they couldn't yet foresee. But as the evening wore on and the candles burned low, there was a sense of resolve around the table. Jonathan and Amara knew they had allies in this fight, friends who would stand by them, even when things got tough. And though the battle was just beginning, they were ready to face it together, with love and determination as their shield against the prejudice and power plays that lay ahead. The buzz of conversation and the clinking of glasses filled the air at Vanessa Reed's mansion, where the latest social gathering was in full swing. The sprawling estate, with its immaculate gardens and ornate fountains, was the epitome of wealth and status in the city. The guest list was exclusive, and the invitations highly coveted. But this time, one couple was conspicuously absent, Jonathan and Amara. As Jonathan sat in his study, the invitation that hadn't arrived weighed heavily on his mind. He knew it was no accident. Vanessa had made a statement, loud and clear, by excluding them. He could feel the anger simmering just beneath the surface. But more than that, he felt a deep sense of frustration. This was more than a social snub. It was a deliberate attempt to isolate them. Amara entered the room, her presence calming as always. She walked over to Jonathan and placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'm guessing we didn't get an invitation?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Jonathan shook his head. "No, we didn't. Vanessa's making her move." Amara sat down across from him, her expression thoughtful. "We knew this would happen eventually," she said. "She wants to make it clear that we're not welcome in her world." Jonathan looked at her, his eyes filled with a mix of admiration and frustration. "But it's our world too," he said. "I've worked hard to get where I am, and I'm not about to let Vanessa or anyone else push us out." Amara smiled softly. "I know, but we need to be smart about this. If we confront her directly, it'll only give her more power. She thrives on conflict." Jonathan sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You're right, but it's hard to just sit back and do nothing." "We're not doing nothing," Amara reminded him. "We're choosing our battles, and right now the best thing we can do is stay above the pettiness." Just then, Jonathan's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it and frowned. "It's Marcus. He's at the party." Amara raised an eyebrow. "What does he say?" Jonathan read the message aloud. "He says that Vanessa is going out of her way to bring up our absence. She's playing the victim, saying how sad it is that we've chosen to distance ourselves from everyone." Amara's eyes narrowed. "She's twisting the narrative, making it look like we're the ones who pulled away." "Exactly," Jonathan said, frustration evident in his voice. "And she's doing it in front of everyone who matters." Amara thought for a moment, then nodded resolutely. "Then we need to counter that, not by confronting her directly, but by showing that we're not affected by her games. We need to continue living our lives, attending other events, and showing that we're just as much a part of this world as anyone else." Jonathan considered her words, then nodded. "You're right. We can't let her see that she's getting to us." Later that evening, as the party at Vanessa's mansion continued in full swing, Jonathan and Amara made their own plans. They called a few of their close friends, those who hadn't attended Vanessa's party, and invited them over for a casual get-together the following weekend. The guest list was carefully curated, including people who weren't deeply entrenched in Vanessa's social circle. The following weekend, their home was filled with the sound of laughter and conversation as their friends gathered for a relaxed evening. The atmosphere was light, the tension of the previous week all but forgotten. Amara moved through the room with ease, engaging in conversations and making everyone feel welcome. Jonathan watched her, admiring the way she handled herself, the way she seemed to effortlessly win people over. As the night went on, Marcus pulled Jonathan aside. "You did the right thing," he said, gesturing to the lively scene around them. "Vanessa might have her claws in the old guard, but you're building something new here. People respect that." Jonathan nodded, feeling a sense of relief. "I just don't want to play her games," he said. "We're better than that." "And you're showing everyone that," Marcus replied. "Vanessa's exclusionary tactics only work if you let them. By doing this, by opening your home and welcoming people, you're showing that you're not going to be boxed out. You're setting the terms." Jonathan smiled, grateful for Marcus's support. "I just want to live my life without all this drama." Marcus chuckled. "You're in the wrong crowd for that, my friend. But you're handling it the best way you can, and people are noticing." Amara joined them, slipping her arm around Jonathan's waist. "What are you two conspiring about?" she asked playfully. "Just strategizing," Marcus said with a grin. "Jonathan's winning over the masses, one party at a time." Amara laughed softly, leaning into Jonathan. "We're just being ourselves," she said. "And if that's enough to make people see us for who we really are, then it's worth it." As the evening wound down and their friends began to leave, Jonathan and Amara stood together in the quiet of their home. the warmth of the night still lingering in the air. They had faced the first real test of their new life together, and they had done it with grace and strength. Jonathan looked down at Amara, his heart swelling with love and admiration. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice steady. Amara smiled up at him, her eyes shining with the same confidence. "We are," she agreed. "No matter what they throw at us, we'll get through it. Together." And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, they knew that they had made the right choice. They wouldn't let Vanessa or anyone else dictate their lives. They would carve out their own place in this world, on their own terms, and nothing, no exclusion, no whispering, no underhanded tactics, would ever change that. The office was a sanctuary for Jonathan, a place where he felt in control, where his decisions shaped the future of his company. But as he stared at the stack of papers on his desk, he couldn't shake the unease that had been gnawing at him since he walked in that morning. The whispers had started to reach his professional life, and he could feel the chill of rumors spreading through the office like a slow, creeping frost. His assistant, Rachel, knocked on the door and entered with a hesitant smile. "Good morning, Mr. Blake," she said, placing a folder on his desk. "These are the reports you asked for." "Thanks, Rachel," Jonathan replied, trying to focus on the work at hand. She lingered for a moment, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, as if debating whether to say something more. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Sir, I don't mean to overstep, but there's something you should know." Jonathan looked up, sensing the tension in her voice. "What is it?" Rachel hesitated, then leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "There's been talk around the office. People are saying that the board is starting to question your leadership because of your marriage to Amara." Jonathan's expression hardened, though he tried to keep his anger in check. "What exactly are they saying?" Rachel glanced around as if to ensure no one else could hear. "It's nothing concrete, just whispers. Some of the board members are concerned that your personal life is affecting your decision-making. They're saying that your relationship is a distraction, that it's causing friction with clients and partners." Jonathan clenched his jaw, his hands gripping the edge of his desk. "And who's spreading these rumors?" Rachel looked uncomfortable, clearly regretting bringing it up. "I'm not sure, sir, but it's starting to gain traction. I thought you should know." "Thank you, Rachel," Jonathan said, his voice tight. "You did the right thing by telling me." She nodded, sensing the conversation was over, and quietly left the room. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair as he tried to process the information. He knew exactly where these rumors were coming from. Vanessa and her cronies, spreading poison to undermine him at every turn. It wasn't enough for them to exclude him socially. Now they were trying to destabilize his professional life as well. His phone buzzed on the desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Amara. "Lunch today? I'm thinking Italian." Jonathan smiled at the message, the warmth of Amara's words cutting through the coldness of the rumors. "Sounds perfect," he replied. "I'll meet you at the usual place." A few hours later, Jonathan walked into the cozy Italian restaurant where they often met for lunch. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the tension he had left behind at the office. Amara was already seated at a corner table, a glass of water in front of her. She looked up and smiled as he approached, but her smile faltered when she saw the look on his face. "What's wrong?" she asked as he sat down. Jonathan sighed, taking a moment to collect his thoughts. "It's the rumors," he said, his voice low. "They're spreading into the office. People are saying that the board is starting to question my leadership because of us." Amara's expression hardened. "I knew Vanessa was petty, but this is low, even for her." Jonathan nodded. "She's trying to destabilize everything I've built, using our marriage as a weapon." Amara reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "We knew this was a possibility," she said softly, "but we can't let it get to us. We need to stay strong, together." Jonathan squeezed her hand, drawing strength from her calm resolve. "I know," he said, "but it's hard. The idea that my personal life could be used against me in this way, it makes me furious." Amara leaned back, considering their options. "Is there anyone on the board you can trust? Someone who might be able to give you more information?" "Marcus," Jonathan said without hesitation. "He's always had my back. I'll talk to him, see if he's heard anything." Amara nodded. "Good. And in the meantime, we keep doing what we're doing, omitting. We don't give them any reason to think we're faltering." Their food arrived, but the conversation stayed focused on the growing challenges they faced. As they ate, Jonathan's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, seeing a message from Marcus. "We need to talk. Meet me after work." Jonathan's heart sank. If Marcus was reaching out like this, it meant the situation was worse than he'd thought. He quickly typed a response, agreeing to meet. After lunch, Jonathan returned to the office, his mind racing. He went through the motions of his work, but his thoughts kept returning to the rumors, to Vanessa, to the possibility that everything he had built was being slowly unraveled by a campaign of lies. By the time the workday ended, Jonathan was on edge. He drove to the bar where he and Marcus had agreed to meet, a quiet, upscale place where they could talk without being overheard. When he arrived, Marcus was already there, nursing a drink. Jonathan sat down, his expression grim. "What's going on?" he asked, skipping the pleasantries. Marcus looked at him, his face serious. "It's bad, Jonathan. The rumors are spreading faster than I expected. Some of the board members are seriously questioning your ability to lead, and it's all because of Vanessa's influence. She's been pushing the narrative that your marriage is causing problems with clients, that it's making you lose focus." Jonathan's fists clenched under the table. "And they're buying it?" Marcus nodded reluctantly. "Some of them, yes. They're using it as an excuse to question your decisions. There's talk of a possible vote of no confidence if things don't improve." Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest. "A vote of no confidence? Are you serious?" Marcus nodded again. "I don't think it'll come to that, not yet, but you need to be prepared. Vanessa is gunning for you, and she's using every trick in the book." Jonathan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "What do I do?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "You need to get ahead of this. Show the board that you're in control, that you're focused and committed. And you need to start rallying your allies, people on the board who support you, who believe in what you're doing. Don't let Vanessa's lies go unchallenged." Jonathan nodded, determination hardening his resolve. "I won't. I'll fight this with everything I've got." Marcus smiled, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "That's the Jonathan I know. We'll get through this, but you need to be smart, strategic." They spent the next hour discussing their plan, identifying potential allies on the board, and strategizing how to counter Vanessa's influence. By the time they left the bar, Jonathan felt more focused, more determined than ever to protect what he had built. When he returned home that night, Amara was waiting for him, a quiet strength in her eyes. She listened as he recounted the conversation with Marcus, nodding thoughtfully as he laid out the plan. "We're in this together," she reminded him as they sat down in the living room, the stress of the day slowly fading. "Whatever happens, we face it as a team." Jonathan pulled her close, grateful for her unwavering support. "I couldn't do this without you," he said, his voice full of emotion. Amara smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you don't have to. We'll get through this, Jonathan. We'll show them that nothing can break us." As they sat together, the weight of the rumors and the challenges ahead seemed a little lighter, their bond a little stronger. And though they knew the fight was far from over, they were ready to face whatever came next, together. The week that followed was a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and carefully orchestrated moves. Jonathan worked tirelessly to shore up support among the board members, reaching out to those he believed were still loyal to him. He knew that the rumors were festering, eating away at the foundation he had built, but he refused to let Vanessa's manipulation succeed. Amara watched him with a mixture of admiration and concern. She knew how much the company meant to him, how hard he had worked to get where he was, but she also saw the toll it was taking on him. The sleepless nights, the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. One evening, after yet another long day, Jonathan came home to find Amara waiting for him in the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand. She had set the table for a quiet dinner, the soft glow of candlelight casting a warm glow over the room. "Hey," she greeted him with a soft smile, though her eyes held a hint of worry. "I thought we could use a relaxing evening." Jonathan smiled tiredly and kissed her on the cheek. "I think you're right. It's been a rough week." They sat down to dinner, and for a while the conversation was light, about her day, about the things they loved. But as the meal went on, Amara could see the tension in his eyes, the weight he was carrying. She reached across the table and took his hand. "You're doing everything you can," she said gently, "but you can't carry all of this on your own." Jonathan sighed, squeezing her hand. "I know, but it feels like no matter what I do, Vanessa is always one step ahead. She's turning people against me faster than I can win them back." "She's exploiting people's fears," Amara said. "But that's her game. Fear, division, manipulation. You've always been different. You've always led with integrity, with respect for others. That's why people have followed you this far, and that's what will carry you through this. Jonathan looked at her, her words soothing the raw edges of his frustration. I just hate that she's making this about us, about our marriage. Amara nodded, her expression softening. I know, but that's why we have to keep standing strong, together. They continued to eat in silence, each lost in their thoughts. As they finished their meal, Jonathan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and frowned. It's an email from Marcus, he said, opening it. His eyes narrowed as he read the message. What is it? Amara asked, her concern deepening. Jonathan looked up, his expression a mix of surprise and determination. Marcus found something, a link between Vanessa and one of the board members, Carter Walsh. It turns out they've been in contact for months, even before the rumors started. He's been feeding her information, helping her undermine me. Amara's eyes widened. Carter Walsh? He's been with the company for years. Exactly, Jonathan said, his voice hardening. And now it makes sense why the rumors spread so quickly. He's been working from the inside, sowing doubt and turning people against me. Amara leaned back, thinking. If you can prove that Carter's been colluding with Vanessa, you could discredit both of them. But you'll need solid evidence. Jonathan nodded. Marcus is working on it. He's already found some emails that suggest they've been coordinating, but we need more. Amara's mind raced, her thoughts coming together. What if we can catch them in the act? Set a trap? Something that forces them to reveal their connection. Jonathan looked at her, a spark of hope in his eyes. That could work, but we'd have to be careful. If they suspect anything, they'll cover their tracks. Amara nodded. We'll need to plan this carefully, but if we can expose them, it could turn everything around. The next few days were a blur of covert preparations. Jonathan and Marcus worked closely, gathering as much information as they could without tipping their hand. They coordinated with a trusted IT specialist who could help them track emails and communications between Vanessa and Carter. Finally, the opportunity came. Carter had scheduled a meeting with Jonathan under the pretense of discussing a new business proposal. But Jonathan knew it was a cover, a way for Carter to gauge how much he knew. He decided to use the meeting to his advantage, planting subtle hints and baiting Carter into making a mistake. The day of the meeting arrived and Jonathan was ready. He sat in his office, the familiar surroundings doing little to calm his nerves. But he was resolute. This was the moment they had been preparing for. Carter entered the office, his usual confident demeanor firmly in place. They exchanged pleasantries, and Jonathan kept the conversation light at first, discussing the business proposal as if nothing was amiss. But as the meeting went on, Jonathan began to steer the conversation toward the rumors, toward the board's concerns. I've been hearing some troubling things lately, Jonathan said casually, watching Carter's reaction closely. Rumors about my leadership, about my ability to guide the company. Carter nodded, his expression carefully neutral. Yes, there has been some talk, but you know how these things are. People get nervous when there's uncertainty. True, Jonathan agreed, leaning back in his chair. But what's strange is how quickly these concerns have spread, almost as if someone's been fanning the flames. Carter's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. Jonathan pressed on, his tone still casual, but with an edge of suspicion. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Carter? Carter's smile was tight, his composure slipping slightly. Of course not. I've been focused on the company's success, just like you. Jonathan nodded as if satisfied with the answer. But inside, he knew he was getting close. He decided to push a little further. It's just strange. I've also heard that someone's been in contact with Vanessa Reed. Someone close to the board. Do you think that could be true? Carter's face froze for just a second, but it was enough for Jonathan to see the fear in his eyes. I wouldn't know about that, Carter said quickly, too quickly. Jonathan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Of course. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. The meeting wrapped up soon after, but Jonathan knew he had rattled Carter. As soon as Carter left, Jonathan contacted Marcus, relaying everything that had happened. That's it, Marcus said over the phone, his voice excited. He's scared. We've got him. Over the next few days, Marcus and the IT specialist worked tirelessly to secure the evidence they needed. They managed to trace a series of emails between Carter and Vanessa, emails that clearly showed their collaboration. Carter had been feeding Vanessa information about the board, about Jonathan's plans, and in return, Vanessa had been helping to spread the rumors and sow discord. With the evidence in hand, Jonathan and Marcus prepared to present their findings to the board. The day of the meeting arrived, and Jonathan felt a mix of nerves and determination as he walked into the boardroom. The room was filled with the familiar faces of his colleagues, some supportive, others wary. Jonathan stood at the head of the table, his gaze steady as he addressed the room. "I've called this meeting to address the concerns that have been raised about my leadership," he began, his voice calm but firm. "There have been rumors, doubts, and attempts to undermine the work we've done together. Today, I'm here to show you the truth." He nodded to Marcus, who began to display the emails on the large screen at the front of the room. The board members leaned in, reading the incriminating messages, their expressions shifting from confusion to shock. "As you can see," Jonathan continued, "these emails clearly show a coordinated effort between Vanessa Reed and Carter Walsh to destabilize our company and undermine my leadership. This isn't just about me. This is an attack on everything we've built together." The room was silent as the board members absorbed the information. Carter, who was sitting at the far end of the table, looked pale, his usual confidence completely shattered. One of the board members, an older man named Robert, spoke up, his voice filled with anger. "This is unacceptable. Carter, you've betrayed our trust and jeopardized the future of this company. I move that we remove you from the board." Effective immediately, there was a murmur of agreement around the table, and the motion was quickly seconded. Carter stood up, his face flushed with humiliation. "You don't understand. Vanessa, But his protests fell on deaf ears. The board members were unanimous in their decision, and Carter was swiftly escorted out of the room. As the door closed behind him, Jonathan felt a wave of relief wash over him. The truth had come to light, and Vanessa's influence had been dealt a significant blow. Robert turned to Jonathan, his expression serious but respectful. "Jonathan, we've always respected your leadership. What's happened here today only reinforces that. You have our full support." The other board members nodded in agreement, their faith in Jonathan restored. He smiled, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I promise to continue leading this company with the integrity and vision that we've always valued." As the meeting adjourned and the board members began to leave, Marcus clapped Jonathan on the back, grinning. "We did it, John. We turned the tide." Jonathan nodded, his thoughts already turning to the next steps. "This is just the beginning, Marcus. We've dealt with Carter, but Vanessa's still out there. We need to stay vigilant." Marcus's smile faded slightly, but he nodded in agreement. "You're right. But for now, let's take this win. You've earned it." Jonathan left the boardroom feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The rumors, the doubts, the fear, they had all been a heavy burden, but now they were starting to lift. As he drove home that evening, he felt a sense of hope that had been missing for far too long. When he walked through the door, Amara was there to greet him, her smile as bright as ever. "How did it go?" she asked, though she could already see the answer in his eyes. Jonathan pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "We did it. We exposed them. Carter's gone, and the board is back on our side." Amara hugged him tightly, relief flooding through her. "I knew you would. You're stronger than they give you credit for, John." They spent the evening celebrating, the tension of the past weeks finally beginning to melt away. As they sat together talking about the future, Jonathan knew that there were still challenges ahead. Vanessa was still out there, and she wouldn't give up easily. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready. With Amara by his side, with the truth on his side, he knew they could face whatever came next, together. The fallout from the board meeting spread quickly through the upper echelons of the city's elite, much like wildfire through dry brush. Within days, the whispers had shifted from Jonathan's supposed incompetence to Carter's disgrace and Vanessa's shadowy influence. Yet while the professional threat had been contained, the social storm was just beginning to rage. Jonathan and Amara decided to attend a charity gala organized by one of the city's most prominent families. The event, held at a grand hotel downtown, promised to be a glittering affair. A night of high society, luxurious gowns, and champagne that flowed like water. But they both knew the real purpose of their attendance: to face the people who had been spreading the venomous rumors, to reclaim their place in a world that had tried to shut them out. As they entered the hotel's lavish ballroom, all eyes turned to them. The murmur of conversation dipped momentarily, replaced by the hushed intensity of curiosity and judgment. Amara, dressed in a stunning emerald gown that accentuated her natural grace, held her head high, her arm linked confidently with Jonathan's. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the scrutiny, but she refused to be cowed by it. "Here we go," Jonathan murmured under his breath, his voice steady but tinged with tension. Amara squeezed his arm reassuringly. "Let them talk. We have nothing to be ashamed of." They made their way through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings with those who dared to approach. Some were genuinely friendly, offering warm smiles and congratulations on their recent success in handling the boardroom drama. Others, however, were more reserved, their eyes betraying a mixture of envy and disdain. At the far end of the room, near a grand staircase adorned with cascading flowers, Vanessa stood with a group of women. She was dressed impeccably, her icy demeanor undisturbed by the scandal that had recently enveloped her. When she saw Jonathan and Amara approaching, her expression didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed slightly. A subtle challenge. "Jonathan," Vanessa greeted him with a thin smile as they reached her. "Amara, how lovely to see you both out and about." Jonathan returned her smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Vanessa, we wouldn't miss this for the world." Amara could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, but she kept her own smile in place, her tone light as she spoke. "It's a beautiful event. You've certainly outdone yourself." Vanessa inclined her head slightly, accepting the compliment as if it were her due. "Thank you, Amara. I do try to keep things interesting." One of the women beside Vanessa, a blonde in her early 30s named Claire, stepped forward with a forced smile. "So, Amara, how are you finding life in the city? I imagine it must be quite different from what you're used to." Amara recognized the veiled insult immediately, the insinuation that she was an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their world. She met Claire's gaze steadily, refusing to rise to the bait. "It has its challenges," she said calmly, "but I've always believed that adaptability is key. I'm learning to navigate the nuances." Claire's smile faltered slightly, and Vanessa's eyes flickered with something akin to approval. But before anyone could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Jonathan, Amara, so glad you could make it." Marcus appeared beside them, his easygoing charm a welcome relief from the undercurrents of hostility. He greeted them both with genuine warmth, then turned to Vanessa with a pointed look. "Quite the gathering you've put together, Vanessa. It's almost as if nothing ever happened." Vanessa's smile grew even thinner, her eyes flashing with irritation at Marcus's subtle jab. "Well, we can't dwell on the past, can we? Life moves on." "Yes, it does," Marcus agreed, his tone just as smooth. "But some things are hard to forget." Jonathan suppressed a smile at Marcus's deft handling of Vanessa, grateful for his friend's support. The tension between the two was palpable, but Marcus's presence had shifted the balance in their favor. As the conversation continued, Amara felt a sense of solidarity forming. Marcus was not the only ally in the room. A few others began to approach, showing their support in subtle ways. Friendly greetings, small talk, a shared laugh at an inside joke. It was clear that not everyone had bought into Vanessa's narrative. Some had seen through the facade, recognized the strength it had taken for Jonathan and Amara to weather the storm. But not everyone was as welcoming. As the evening wore on, Amara overheard snippets of conversation, thinly veiled criticisms, questions about her suitability as Jonathan's wife, comments about how things were better before. Each remark was a tiny cut, a reminder that despite their recent victory, there were still many who saw her as an outsider, an interloper in their carefully constructed world. At one point, Amara excused herself and made her way to the restroom, needing a moment to collect her thoughts. As she stood in front of the mirror, fixing her makeup, she couldn't help but hear the voices of two women who had just entered. "Can you believe she showed up here after everything that's happened?" one of them said, her tone dripping with contempt. "She doesn't belong here," the other woman replied. "It's bad enough that she married him, but now she's flaunting it. It's like she thinks she's one of us." Amara's hand stilled, her reflection staring back at her with a calm exterior that belied the storm brewing inside. She had dealt with this her whole life, the whispers, the judgments, the subtle and not so subtle reminders that she was different. But hearing it now in this setting, after everything she and Jonathan had been through, it cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Taking a deep breath, Amara forced herself to focus. She wasn't going to let their words define her or dictate how she felt about herself. She was here because she belonged by Jonathan's side, not because of their approval. As she exited the restroom, she nearly bumped into Vanessa, who was waiting just outside. Vanessa's expression was unreadable. But there was a glint in her eye that suggested she had overheard the exchange as well. "They're not wrong, you know," Vanessa said quietly, her voice low enough that only Amara could hear. "You don't belong here." Amara met her gaze, her voice steady as she responded. "Belonging isn't something you get to decide, Vanessa. I'm here because I choose to be, and Jonathan chooses me every day. That's all that matters." Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could respond, Amara walked past her, her head held high. She rejoined Jonathan, who was talking with a small group of colleagues, his face lighting up as she approached. "Everything okay?" he asked, his voice filled with a concern. Amara smiled, slipping her hand into his. "Everything's fine. Let's enjoy the rest of the evening." They spent the next hour mingling, moving through the room with a confidence that defied the whispers and judgmental stares. Slowly but surely, Amara noticed a shift. People began to approach them with genuine interest, curious about her background, her thoughts on various topics. The ice that had surrounded them when they first arrived was beginning to thaw, replaced by a grudging respect for the couple who had faced down adversity and emerged stronger for it. As the night drew to a close, Vanessa made her way over to them once more, her expression as composed as ever. "Well, it seems you've made quite an impression," she said, her tone neutral but laced with something unspoken. Jonathan nodded, his gaze steady. "We're just being ourselves, Vanessa. That's all we've ever done." Vanessa's smile was cold. "Indeed, but remember, Jonathan, people have long memories, and the social landscape is constantly shifting. Today's victory doesn't guarantee tomorrow's success." Jonathan returned her smile with one of his own, just as cold. "We're well aware, Vanessa, and we're ready for whatever comes next." Vanessa's eyes flicked to Amara, who met her gaze without flinching. After a moment, Vanessa inclined her head slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken battle that had been waged and, for now, won. As she walked away, Amara let out a brimah she hadn't realized she was holding. Jonathan squeezed her hand, offering her a reassuring smile. "We did good tonight," he said softly. Amara nodded, feeling the tension slowly melt away. "Yes, we did. But this isn't over, is it?" "No," Jonathan agreed, his expression thoughtful. "But we're stronger now. We've shown them that we're not going to be pushed out." As they left the gala, walking out into the cool night air, Amara felt a sense of calm settling over her. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the challenges far from over. But for the first time, she felt truly ready to face whatever came their way, together. And as they drove home, hand in hand, the city lights flickering in the distance, Amara knew that no matter how fierce the social storm became, they would weather it. Their bond was stronger than the judgment of others, and their love more powerful than any prejudice. The morning after the charity gala, Jonathan and Amara woke to a city that was still abuzz with the aftermath of the event. The media coverage, as expected, was intense. Articles dissecting every detail from the guest list to the outfits, and of course the subtle but noticeable tension between the elites. Jonathan had grown used to the scrutiny, but this time he sensed a shift in the narrative. The articles were more sympathetic towards him and Amara, portraying them as a couple who had faced undue adversity with grace and strength. Over breakfast, Jonathan scrolled through his phone, reading the latest headlines. Amara, sipping her coffee, noticed his slight smile. "Good news?" she asked, her tone curious. "It seems like the media is finally seeing things our way," Jonathan replied, showing her one of the articles. "They're highlighting how we've handled everything. Even some of our critics are softening their tone." Amara skimmed the article, nodding thoughtfully. "That's a relief, but we both know Vanessa won't take this lying down." Jonathan's expression darkened at the mention of Vanessa. "You're right. She's been quiet. Too quiet. I'm sure she's already planning her next move." As if on cue, Jonathan's phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from Marcus, marked as urgent. He opened it and quickly read through the message, his frown deepening with each line. "What is it?" Amar asked, noticing the change in his demeanor. "Marcus just found out that Vanessa's planning to host an exclusive event next week, a private luncheon with some of the city's most influential figures. It's being billed as a charity event, but Marcus thinks it's more than that. He believes she's using it as a way to rally support and undermine us again." Amara set her coffee cup down, her mind racing. "We can't let her regain control of the narrative. We need to be there." Jonathan nodded in agreement. Absolutely. But it's invitation only. And as of now, we haven't been invited. Then we'll have to find another way in, Amara said firmly. We can't let her manipulate the situation behind closed doors. The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Jonathan and Amara worked closely with Marcus, strategizing how they could gain access to Vanessa's event. It wasn't just about crashing the luncheon. It was about ensuring that they had a voice in whatever discussions took place. They knew Vanessa would be trying to turn the tide of public opinion back in her favor, and they couldn't afford to be blindsided. On the morning of the luncheon, Marcus managed to secure a last-minute invitation for Jonathan under the guise of a potential donor. Amara, however, would have to remain outside, given the strictly limited guest list. They both knew it was a risky move, but there was no other option. The luncheon was held at an opulent estate on the outskirts of the city, a place where power and wealth converged behind tall gates and manicured gardens. Jonathan arrived dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, his demeanor calm but alert. As he walked through the grand entrance, he quickly assessed the room. The who's who of the city's elite were there. Business magnates, politicians, socialites, all gathered under Vanessa's careful orchestration. Vanessa herself was stationed near the entrance, greeting guests with her usual icy charm. When she saw Jonathan, her smile didn't falter, but there was a flicker of surprise in her eyes. She hadn't expected him to show up. Jonathan, Vanessa said smoothly, extending her hand. I wasn't expecting to see you here. Jonathan shook her hand, his grip firm. I wouldn't miss it. It's always a pleasure to support a good cause. Of course, Vanessa replied, her voice laced with a subtle challenge. I'm sure you'll find today's discussions enlightening. Jonathan smiled, a hint of steel in his eyes. I'm sure I will. The luncheon unfolded in typical fashion, with speeches about philanthropy and networking opportunities. But Jonathan could sense the underlying tension in the room, the unspoken power dynamics at play. Vanessa moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her conversations laced with calculated charm. Jonathan knew she was subtly gauging her supporters, reassuring them, and planting seeds of doubt about him and Amara. At one point, Vanessa took the floor to give a speech. She spoke eloquently about the importance of unity and community, her words seemingly benign but carrying a deeper message. She subtly hinted at the challenges faced by their social circle, the need to protect their values and traditions. It was clear to Jonathan that she was alluding to him and Amara, painting them as outsiders threatening the established order. As Vanessa spoke, Jonathan noticed some guests nodding in agreement, their expressions serious. Others, however, seemed less convinced, their eyes flicking to him with curiosity or doubt. The room was divided, and Vanessa was trying to tip the scales in her favor. When Vanessa finished her speech, there was polite applause. As the guests began to mingle again, Jonathan knew he had to act quickly. He made his way to the small group that had been most receptive to Vanessa's message, engaging them in conversation. I couldn't help but notice the passion in Vanessa's speech, Jonathan began, his tone measured. But I think it's important to remember that true strength lies in diversity, in embracing change rather than fearing it. Our city has always thrived on innovation and progress, and that's something worth preserving. One of the men, a prominent real estate developer named Richard, raised an eyebrow. And how do you propose we do that, Jonathan? Change can be destabilizing. We've built something strong here. Why risk it? Jonathan met Richard's gaze evenly. By recognizing that change is inevitable. The question isn't whether we should adapt, but how we can do so in a way that benefits everyone. My wife and I believe in building bridges, not walls. We've faced challenges, yes, but they've only strengthened our resolve to contribute positively to this community. Another guest, a well-known philanthropist named Lydia, nodded thoughtfully. I've seen the work you and Amara have done, Jonathan. It's commendable, but there are those who feel threatened by such rapid change, especially when it comes to certain social dynamics. Jonathan knew what Lydia was alluding to, the unspoken prejudice that had fueled much of the resistance they'd faced. He chose his words carefully. I understand those concerns, Lydia, but I believe that the true measure of a community's strength is how it treats those who are different, how it embraces new perspectives. That's what will keep us strong in the long run. As the conversation continued, Jonathan could see that his words were having an effect. Richard, Lydia, and a few others seemed to be reconsidering their stance, their expressions softening. But he also knew that this was just the beginning. Vanessa's influence ran deep, and it would take more than one conversation to undo the damage she had caused. Meanwhile, outside the estate, Amara waited in the car, her mind racing. She knew Jonathan could handle himself, but she hated being left out of the action. She was used to being at his side, supporting him in every way she could. As the minutes ticked by, she grew more restless, her thoughts turning to Vanessa and what she might be planning next. Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "Keep an eye on the media tonight. Vanessa's pulling strings." Amara's heart sank. If Vanessa was manipulating the media, it meant that whatever happened at the luncheon, the public perception could be skewed in her favor. They had to be ready to counter whatever narrative Vanessa was about to spin. When Jonathan finally emerged from the estate, Amara could tell from his expression that the luncheon had been tense but productive. He filled her in on the conversations he'd had, the progress he'd made with some of the guests. But when she showed him Marcus's message, his face hardened. "She's already making her move," Jonathan said, his voice grim. "We need to be prepared." That evening, as they sat in their living room watching the news coverage of the luncheon, their worst fears were confirmed. Several outlets had already published stories with headlines that hinted at division within the city's elite, with subtle digs at Jonathan and Amara's unconventional marriage and approach to business. It was clear that Vanessa had wasted no time in trying to regain control of the narrative. But Jonathan and Amara were ready. They immediately contacted Marcus, who had already begun working on countermeasures, releasing their own statements to the press, reaching out to allies in the media, and preparing to go on the offensive if necessary. They knew this wasn't just about the luncheon or the immediate fallout. It was about the long game, the battle for public opinion and their place in the city's future. As they worked late into the night, strategizing and planning their next moves, Amara felt a familiar determination settle over her. Vanessa might have made her next move, but this wasn't over. They would continue to fight, not just for their own future, but for the values they believed in, the values of acceptance, progress, and unity. Jonathan glanced at Amara, his expression resolute. "We've come too far to let her win now." Amara nodded, her voice steady. "We're in this together, John. We always have been." As the city lights flickered outside their window, Jonathan and Amara knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but they were more determined than ever. Vanessa might be a formidable opponent, but together, they were unstoppable. The day after Vanessa's media maneuvering, Jonathan and Amara were on high alert. The morning news cycles were saturated with coverage of the luncheon, each segment subtly tainted by Vanessa's influence. Words like controversy, unrest, and division were repeated across channels, casting doubt on Jonathan's leadership and Amara's place by his side. Despite their efforts to counter Vanessa's narrative, the damage was evident. Jonathan stood by the window of their penthouse apartment, phone in hand, scrolling through article after article. Amara joined him, handing him a fresh cup of coffee. "Any luck?" she asked, though the answer was clear in Jonathan's furrowed brow. "Not as much as we'd hoped," Jonathan replied, his voice tense. "Vanessa's got the upper hand with the media right now. They're running with the story she fed them, painting us as the outsiders stirring up trouble." Amara took a deep breath, letting the frustration wash over her before she spoke. "We need to change the conversation. If we can rally the right people, get them to speak out in our favor, it might turn the tide." Jonathan nodded, considering her words. "You're right. We need to reach out to our allies, the people who believe in what we're trying to do, but it's going to take more than just a few phone calls. We need to be strategic about this." They spent the rest of the morning planning their next moves. They compiled a list of key allies, business leaders, community organizers, influencers, who had either supported them in the past or could be swayed to their side. Each name on the list represented a potential voice in the media, someone who could help shift the narrative away from Vanessa's divisive rhetoric and towards a message of unity and progress. By midday, they began making calls. Jonathan reached out to business partners and industry peers, while Amara focused on community leaders and influencers who could speak to a broader audience. Each conversation was different, tailored to the person they were speaking with, but the underlying message was the same. They needed to stand together against the forces trying to drag the city back into old, prejudiced ways of thinking. Jonathan's first call was to an old friend and mentor, Robert Klein, a respected figure in the finance world who had always been a voice of reason. Robert had watched Jonathan's rise with a mixture of pride and concern, knowing the challenges he faced as a young, innovative CEO. "Robert, I need your help," Jonathan said, after exchanging pleasantries. "You've seen what's been happening. Vanessa's trying to turn the city against us, and she's using the media to do it. There was a pause on the other end of the line before Robert spoke. I've seen the coverage, Jonathan. It's a tough situation, but you've handled worse. What do you need from me? I need you to speak out publicly, Jonathan replied, his tone earnest. You have a voice that people respect, a reputation that's untouchable. If you can show your support, it could make a real difference. Robert sighed, the weight of the request clear in his voice. You're asking me to pick sides, Jonathan. This could alienate some of my own allies. I know, Jonathan admitted, but I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. This isn't just about me or Amara. It's about standing up against the kind of thinking that's holding us back. We need to move forward, not let ourselves be dragged back into the past. There was a long silence before Robert finally responded. All right, Jonathan, I'll do it. But be prepared, this won't be easy. Vanessa won't take it lying down. Jonathan thanked him, feeling a small weight lift off his shoulders. It was a start. Meanwhile, Amara was on the phone with Carmen Morales, a well-known activist and founder of a nonprofit focused on racial justice and community empowerment. Carmen had a substantial following, and her endorsement could help shift public opinion in their favor. Carmen, I know you've seen the news, Amara said, cutting straight to the point. We need people like you to speak up, to show that there's another side to this story. I've seen it, Carmen replied, her voice sharp with indignation. And it's disgusting. Vanessa and her crowd are using their influence to push an agenda that's as old as it is ugly. But Amara, you have to know that this won't be easy. They'll come after anyone who stands with you. I know, Amara said, her voice steady. But we can't let that stop us. This isn't just about Jonathan and me. It's about the message we're sending to everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. We need to show them that there's a place for all of us in this city. Carmen was quiet for a moment before she spoke again, her tone resolute. You're right. We need to fight this, and we need to do it together. I'll make a statement, and I'll rally others to do the same. We're with you, Amara. With each call, they gathered more support. Influential voices began to speak out, writing op-eds, making social media posts, and giving interviews that countered Vanessa's narrative. The tide was slowly beginning to turn, but they knew it wasn't enough to just play defense. They needed to go on the offensive. Later that afternoon, Jonathan and Amara met with Marcus at their office to discuss the next phase of their plan. Marcus, ever the strategist, had been working tirelessly behind the scenes to gather intel on Vanessa's next moves and to craft a media strategy that could outmaneuver her. We need to focus on the bigger picture, Marcus said, spreading out a series of documents on the conference table. Vanessa's trying to make this about you two personally, but the real issue here is about the future of this city. We need to position you as the leaders who are looking forward, who are embracing change and diversity as strengths. Jonathan nodded, scanning the documents. And how do we do that without making it look like we're just responding to her attacks? We go bigger, Marcus replied, his eyes gleaming with determination. We organize a public event, something that brings together different communities, different voices. It'll be a celebration of the city's diversity and progress, and it'll send a clear message that the old ways of thinking won't hold us back. Amara smiled, catching on to Marcus's vision. A unity event, something that shows we're not just surviving, we're thriving, and we're doing it together. Marcus nodded. Exactly. We'll invite the media, key figures from the community, and make sure it's well publicized. This isn't just about countering Vanessa, it's about showing everyone what we stand for. The plan took shape quickly. They decided to hold the event in one of the city's most iconic public spaces, a park that had long been a gathering place for people from all walks of life. The theme would be unity in diversity, a celebration of the city's multicultural fabric and the strength that came from embracing different perspectives. Over the next week, they worked tirelessly to organize the event. Invitations were sent out, logistics were arranged, and word spread quickly through social media and local news outlets. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with people eager to attend and show their support for a vision of the city that was inclusive and forward-looking. On the day of the event, the park was transformed into a vibrant celebration. Colorful banners and decorations adorned the area, and a stage was set up for speeches and performances. Food stalls offered a variety of cuisines, reflecting the city's diverse cultural heritage. The atmosphere was festive, but there was also a sense of purpose, a collective determination to stand up for the values that Jonathan and Amara had championed. As the crowd began to gather, Jonathan and Amara walked through the park, greeting attendees and soaking in the energy. They saw familiar faces, friends, colleagues, and community leaders who had stood by them, but also many new ones, people who had been inspired by their message. When it was time for the speeches, Jonathan took the stage first. He looked out at the crowd, at the sea of faces that represented the city's diversity, and felt a surge of pride. This was what they had been fighting for. "Thank you all for being here today," Jonathan began, his voice strong and clear. "We're here to celebrate the very thing that makes our city great, our diversity, our willingness to embrace change, and our commitment to building a future where everyone has a place." In recent weeks, there's been a lot of talk about division, about the challenges we face. But I believe that these challenges are what will make us stronger as long as we face them together. The crowd erupted into applause, and Jonathan paused, letting the moment sink in. He continued, "My wife and I have faced our share of obstacles, and we know we're not alone. Many of you have also faced prejudice, exclusion, and resistance to change. But we're here today to say that those days are behind us. We're moving forward, and we're doing it together." Amara joined him on stage, her presence eliciting another wave of applause. She took the microphone, her voice filled with passion. "This city is our home, and it belongs to all of us. It's a place where differences aren't just tolerated, they're celebrated. We're not just building a future for ourselves, but for everyone who believes in the power of unity, in the strength that comes from standing together." As they finished their speeches, the crowd's applause was deafening. The event continued with performances from local artists, speeches from community leaders, and a palpable sense of hope and determination. By the end of the day, it was clear that the event had been a success. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive, highlighting the message of unity and progress. Jonathan and Amara had not only weathered Vanessa's storm, but had turned it into an opportunity to strengthen their position and rally the city behind them. As they walked through the park one last time, hand in hand, they knew the fight wasn't over. But they also knew that they weren't alone, that they had the support of a city that was ready to move forward together. In the aftermath of the Unity event, the city buzzed with the renewed sense of optimism that Jonathan and Amara had worked so hard to foster. The media coverage was largely positive, with headlines praising the couple's message of inclusivity and the city's embrace of diversity. For a brief moment, it seemed as though they had turned the tide, that the forces of division had been pushed back. But Vanessa was not one to be defeated so easily. The following week, as Jonathan and Amara were beginning to settle into a new rhythm of cautious optimism, the first signs of Vanessa's retaliation emerged. It started with a few cryptic social media posts from accounts linked to Vanessa's inner circle, posts that hinted at a new scandal, something that would expose the truth about Jonathan and Amara's rise to power. Jonathan noticed the post late one evening, while he and Amara were unwinding after another long day. He scrolled through his phone, the ominous messages catching his attention immediately. "Amara, look at this," he said, handing her the phone. "Vanessa's up to something. These accounts are all tied to her. They're hinting at some kind of scandal." Amara's face tensed as she read the posts. "She's desperate," she said. "She's trying to discredit us because she knows she can't win on merit. But what could she possibly have on us?" Jonathan shook his head, frustration seeping into his voice. "I don't know, but we need to be prepared. We need to get ahead of whatever she's planning." The next morning, Marcus called an emergency meeting at the office. He had already been tracking Vanessa's movements closely, and the latest developments had put him on high alert. As Jonathan and Amara entered the conference room, Marcus greeted them with a grim expression. "We've got a problem," Marcus said without preamble. "Vanessa's pulling out all the stops. I've been hearing rumors that she's been digging into your pasts, looking for anything she can use to tarnish your reputations." Jonathan leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What could she possibly find? We've been careful, kept everything above board." Marcus sighed. "Sion, it's not about what's true. It's about what she can spin to make you look bad. She's got a team of people working on this, and they're not above manufacturing evidence if they have to. We need to be ready for anything." The mood in the room was tense as they discussed their options. Marcus recommended hiring a crisis management team to handle any potential fallout, as well as legal counsel to prepare for any false accusations that might surface. They also decided to reach out to their most trusted allies, warning them of the impending attack and asking for their continued support. As the meeting concluded, Jonathan's mind was racing. He had always known that Vanessa was ruthless, but this level of vindictiveness was beyond anything he had anticipated. He looked at Amara, who was deep in thought, her brow furrowed with concern. "We'll get through this," Jonathan said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've faced worse, and we've come out stronger." Amara nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "We have to be ready for anything, Jonathan. Vanessa's not just trying to ruin us. She's trying to destroy everything we've built." Over the next few days, the tension in the air was palpable. Jonathan and Amara's team worked around the clock, preparing for the worst. Every move Vanessa made was scrutinized, every rumor was chased down, but there was little concrete information to act on. Vanessa's plans remained shrouded in secrecy, creating an atmosphere of dread that hung over the entire operation. Then, on the fifth day, it happened. Early in the morning, while Jonathan and Amara were at home, the first news story broke. A well-known tabloid ran an explosive article accusing Jonathan of insider trading, an accusation that, while completely fabricated, was backed up by falsified documents that Vanessa's team had created. The article was filled with lurid details, painting Jonathan as a corrupt CEO who had used his position to enrich himself at the expense of his investors. Within hours, the story spread like wildfire. Other media outlets picked it up, and social media exploded with speculation. Vanessa's supporters fanned the flames, sharing the story with glee and adding their own embellishments. The narrative that Jonathan and Amara had worked so hard to build was suddenly under siege. Jonathan sat at his desk, staring at the news article on his screen. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages, but he ignored them, focusing instead on the words in front of him. It felt surreal, as though he were reading about someone else, not the life he had built with integrity and hard work. Amara entered the room, her face pale. "Jonathan, the phones won't stop ringing. Our investors are panicking, and the board wants an emergency meeting." Jonathan nodded, his jaw clenched. "I expected something like this, but it still feels like a punch to the gut. We need to act fast before this gets out of control." They rushed to the office, where Marcus was already coordinating the crisis response. The legal team was preparing a statement denying the accusations, and the crisis management team was working on a plan to counter the narrative. But the damage had been done. Vanessa had successfully planted a seed of doubt in the public's mind, and it would take a monumental effort to undo it. As the day wore on, the pressure mounted. Investors threatened to pull out, and the company's stock price began to plummet. The board of directors, worried about the potential fallout, demanded answers. Jonathan spent hours on the phone trying to reassure them, but he could sense their growing unease. Amara, meanwhile, focused on reaching out to their allies. She called Carmen Morales, Robert Klein, and others who had supported them in the past, asking for their public support in the face of the accusations. But even as they expressed their willingness to help, there was a noticeable hesitation in their voices, a fear that they might be dragged into the scandal themselves. Late in the evening, after a grueling day of damage control, Jonathan and Amara sat in their living room exhausted. The house, usually a sanctuary, felt oppressive, weighed down by the events of the day. "This is worse than I imagined," Amara said quietly, her voice filled with despair. "She's trying to tear everything apart." Jonathan took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll fight back, Amara. We'll clear our names and show everyone the truth. But it's going to be a long battle." As they sat in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on them, they both knew that the fight against Vanessa had entered a new, darker phase. The unity they had celebrated just days before now seemed fragile, threatened by the power of lies and manipulation. But despite the overwhelming odds, Jonathan and Amara were determined to stand their ground. They had come too far, fought too hard, to let Vanessa's schemes destroy them. The battle for their reputation, their company, and their future had only just begun. The next morning, the city woke to an air of uncertainty. The scandal that Vanessa had unleashed continued to dominate the news, and Jonathan and Amara's reputation hung in the balance. But instead of retreating, they decided to face the crisis head-on, knowing that this could be their last chance to turn the tide. The day began with a tense board meeting. Jonathan and Amara sat at the head of the table, facing the board members who had become increasingly anxious over the past 24 hours. Some of them were visibly shaken, their confidence in Jonathan's leadership waning in the face of the relentless media assault. Jonathan spoke first, his voice steady but filled with urgency. I understand the concerns you all have, and I want to address them directly. The accusations against me are completely false. They're part of a coordinated attack to undermine everything we've built, but we're not going to let them win. One of the board members, a middle-aged man with graying hair, leaned forward. Jonathan, the evidence they presented is damning. Even if it's fabricated, the damage is already done. Our investors are panicking, and the stock is plummeting. How do you plan to address this? We're already working on that, Jonathan replied, glancing at Marcus, who nodded in agreement. Our legal team is gathering evidence to disprove these allegations, and we're preparing a public statement to set the record straight. But more than that, we're going to show the world what this is really about. A desperate attempt by someone who's threatened by the progress we've made. Amara took over, her voice calm but firm. This isn't just about Jonathan or our company. It's about the future we're trying to build, one that's inclusive and forward-thinking. Vanessa is trying to tear that down because she's afraid of change. But we can't let fear dictate our actions. We have to stand strong and show everyone that we're not backing down. The boardroom was silent for a moment, the weight of Amara's words sinking in. Finally, another board member, a woman in her late 50s, spoke up. I've been with this company from the beginning, and I've seen the incredible work that both of you have done. We've weathered storms before, and we'll get through this one too. You have my support. One by one, the other board members voiced their agreement, albeit with varying levels of enthusiasm. It was clear that not everyone was fully convinced, but they were willing to give Jonathan and Amara the chance to prove themselves. After the meeting, Jonathan and Amara returned to their office, where Marcus was waiting with an update. We've got a solid plan, Marcus said, laying out the details. We're going to hold a press conference this afternoon where you'll both address the allegations head-on. We'll also present evidence that disproves the claims against you, and I've arranged for a few key allies to make statements of support. Jonathan nodded, feeling a surge of determination. Good. We need to be clear and confident. We're not just defending ourselves. We're going on the offensive. Vanessa wants to play dirty, but we're going to expose her for what she really is. The hours leading up to the press conference were a blur of activity. The legal team worked tirelessly to finalize the evidence they would present, while the communications team crafted a powerful statement that would resonate with both the media and the public. Jonathan and Amara rehearsed their speeches, refining their message until it was sharp and compelling. As the time for the press conference approached, the tension in the air was palpable. The venue, a large conference hall in the city center, was packed with reporters and cameras, all eager to capture the drama that had gripped the city. Outside, protesters gathered, some supporting Jonathan and Amara, others holding signs that echoed Vanessa's accusations. Jonathan and Amara arrived at the venue together, flanked by their legal team and Marcus. As they stepped onto the stage, the flash of cameras and the murmur of the crowd filled the room. They stood side by side at the podium, a united front against the storm that had been unleashed. Jonathan spoke first, his voice ringing out clearly in the packed hall. Thank you all for being here today. I know there's been a lot of speculation and misinformation circulating in the past few days, and I want to address it directly. The accusations against me are false. They are part of a calculated attack designed to undermine not just me, but the values that this company and this city stand for. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. We have gathered evidence that will prove my innocence beyond a shadow of a doubt, and we will be taking legal action against those responsible for these false claims. But this isn't just about clearing my name. It's about standing up for what's right. We cannot allow fear, prejudice, and lies to dictate the future of our city. Amara stepped forward, her voice filled with quiet strength. This is about more than just us. It's about the kind of city we want to live in. A city that values diversity, inclusivity, and progress. Vanessa and those who support her are trying to take us back to a time when fear and division ruled. But we're not going to let that happen. We're going to fight for the future we believe in, and we're going to win. As they finished their speeches, Marcus stepped forward to present the evidence that disproved the allegations. He displayed documents, financial records, and witness statements that clearly showed the accusations were baseless, carefully orchestrated by Vanessa's team. The reporters in the room took frantic notes, the tide of the narrative beginning to turn. After the evidence was presented, Jonathan and Amara opened the floor to questions. The atmosphere was tense as reporters fired off inquiries, some challenging, others supportive. Jonathan and Amara handled each question with poise, reiterating their commitment to transparency and integrity. One reporter, however, was more pointed. Jonathan, even if these allegations are proven false, the damage to your reputation is significant. How do you plan to rebuild trust with your investors and the public? Jonathan didn't hesitate. Trust is built through actions, not words. We've always operated with integrity, and will continue to do so. The truth will prevail, and we'll emerge from this stronger than ever. We're not just fighting for our reputation, we're fighting for the principles that guide us, and those principles haven't changed. The press conference lasted nearly an hour, and by the end, it was clear that Jonathan and Amara had regained control of the narrative. The reporters left with a new story to tell, one of resilience, determination, and the power of truth. Later that evening, Jonathan and Amara sat in their living room, exhausted but relieved. The day had been a turning point, a chance to reclaim their story and push back against Vanessa's lies. "We did it," Amara said, leaning back on the couch with a tired smile. "We're not out of the woods yet, but we've turned the tide." Jonathan nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "Vanessa threw everything she had at us, and we're still standing. She underestimated us, and now she's the one who's on the defensive." As they reflected on the day's events, there was a knock at the door. Marcus entered, holding a tablet with the latest news coverage of the press conference. "It's looking good," Marcus said, showing them the headlines. "Most of the major outlets are running with the story of how you exposed Vanessa's smear campaign. Public opinion is shifting in your favor. We're not out of the woods yet, but the momentum is on our side." Jonathan took the tablet, scanning the headlines. The coverage was overwhelmingly positive, with many articles highlighting the strength and unity that Jonathan and Amara had shown in the face of adversity. It was a far cry from the hostile headlines of just a few days earlier. "Let's not get complacent," Jonathan said, though his tone was hopeful. "Vanessa's not going to give up easily. We need to keep pushing forward, keep building on this momentum." Amara nodded in agreement. "We've come too far to let her take us down now. We'll keep fighting, and we'll keep showing the city what we're really about." As the evening wore on, Jonathan and Amara finally allowed themselves a moment of peace. The battle was far from over, but they had survived the worst of it. They had faced Vanessa's worst, and they had come out stronger, their resolve unshaken. In the days that followed, the city watched as Jonathan and Amara continued their work, undeterred by the challenges they faced. Their story became one of resilience and determination, a testament to the power of truth in the face of lies. And while Vanessa remained a formidable opponent, it was clear that her influence was waning. The more she tried to tear them down, the more the city rallied behind Jonathan and Amara, recognizing them as the true leaders who could guide the city into the future. As they looked out over the city they loved, Jonathan and Amara knew that the fight for their future and the future of the city was far from over. But they also knew that they were not alone. They had each other, they had their allies, and they had a city that believed in them. And that, they realized, was more powerful than anything Vanessa could ever throw at them.